Oh, good morning, everybody. Great to be back across the ditch, as we say. Am I the only Australian in the room? Oh, there's two there. Excellent. It's always good to have kingship around, but excellent. And thank you very much again for having me here. So let's start. Let's start if I can press. There you go. Got it. I'm on. I just can't see it on here. But hopefully it will happen. Technology will work its magic. You can't have a tech leak when you start a presentation, right? So let me start. I saw my grandparents growing sugarcane in Fiji. I watched them plant for a market they never saw. Back then I termed it farm to fork. What I want to talk about today and this morning is the flip. And ask you the question in the room, are you designing for the fork or are you still growing for the farm? It's changing, that's good. I've spent 25 years in all of these companies. Most of that starting with the consumer, or the fork as I call it, and working backwards. Many of those brands that you know, a few Kiwi companies in there too. And I've spent those not just in Australia, but across Asia Pacific, working across different cultures, different markets, different countries. In all of them, the question was always about how do we create value to the end market and the end consumer. But when I was at KFC, it was about moving from sustainable palm oil to high oleic canola, an oil crop that the farmers in Australia had never grown. So it wasn't just about understanding what was going to be at the restaurant level that a 15-year-old could process. It was actually about understanding the farm, the processing and distribution to get it to market. Most recently, and through COVID, I was at Simplot. Frozen potatoes, frozen vegetables, where I led a business case for about 70 million circa to create value and whole of crop from using that whole fork to farm approach in frozen vegetables. And I appreciate the pain as I stand today with the closing of Watties in New Zealand and what that is doing. It's not only in the big areas that I've actually helped, it's been also in startups as well as scale-ups, most particularly small and medium. Producers who've started and are asking the question, how do I create value? And that was in starting what is a world first innovation centre called Monash Food Innovation now, that's still running 11 years on without $1 of public funding in Australia, and basically helps to create innovations for the market. We have to acknowledge today, I think I have to press harder on the remote. We have to acknowledge today the moment that we find ourselves in. Volatility has become our new normal, and it's not going to be the exception. It doesn't mean that all these disruptions will continue to come. There are going to be different triggers. The question becomes, is how do you in your organisations and your business on your farms actually start to create, not look at these as one-off, but a pattern that is following. The flow tends to be very much as well as internal as well as it is external. What I mean by that is that the vulnerability is showing in the system, in the supply chain that we have taken for granted over the years, using a very linear way that we've been actually creating products and produce for the market. And speed, of course, I don't have to say much about speed. It's not a choice. You have to. If not, it's the race to the bottom and you'll be left behind. So when we look at disruption, it's really the context, but it's not the full story. And I'm about to share a framework with you today that I introduced to Australian horticulture in 2017. I know it's before COVID, and I call it fondly BC. No one remembers that, right? But the reason I pulled it up here is because of all the conversations I've had since I came to New Zealand at the end of May for Itipu, and now I'm back again, and the conversations in between. But what I'm seeing in the marketplace is this move up the value curve, which is absolutely right. We're seeing now fruits and vegetables become that space and command the space in the lunchbox for little Johnny, for snacking occasions, pre-packed vegetables for air frying, as the consumer shifts how it's actually cooking, adopting a new consumer trend, which I'm seeing in Australia now, like corn ribs, which my team started in Simplot as frozen corn ribs back in the day. So it's great to see fresh and frozen starting to really connect in terms of what that looks like. So farm to fork is a sector default. You grow what the land gives you, you nurture it back, you sell what it's grown, and you find a buyer to that fact. The supply leaves, and usually the market absorbs it. The flip that I want to share with you today is fork to farm, and that flip, you actually name your consumer first, the one that you're producing for, the one that will actually take money and buy your product. Then design the variety and the season back from it. And I'm hoping that that's not a new kind of thinking, because I've heard many of you actually kind of start to talk about this way. Here, demand leads, and the supply is built to meet it. This phrase is not just my own intervention. It borrows from the logic of FMCG that I've been very well trained in for decades, and asks the question whether horticulture could run the same way as FMCG has. And as I mentioned, I shared this framework in 2017 in Australia, and I am pleased to stand here, not to take credit for it, but I've seen how that mindset is starting to evolve in horticulture and produce. Very simple diagram, fork to farm rather than farm to fork. We heard this morning from the Minister, growth is not the question in this room. The question is whether the sector can design the opportunity ahead of it, using that fork to farm logic I defined, or grow into the opportunity by default. Yes, you've got markets opening up, absolutely. But you're one of many countries, and yes, my country, Australia, is probably in the same boat as you guys. And so the difference for me is the sector that will capture the next decade of growth, or the sector that will watch someone else capture it and just grow into it by default. This is where you could pick your moment. If you're a grower in the room, the fork to farm habit starts with one conversation. Ask your biggest buyer, what do they need in 3 years, not the next season? How many of those questions do you have? Give me a show of hands. Come on, there must be a few. Thank you. For the processors in the room, pick one product line. Trace it whether that specification was set by the consumer insight, or was it the OE to meet the factory conditions and how you run it? Or was it the retailer's spec? That farm to fork thinking is wearing a processor's coat at the end of the day. So what's happening? The fork is changing, and very, very rapidly. And I'm talking about consumers here. There's many things that I could share, but I picked 3 of these things and they're for a strategic reason, given we are in the strategic session. 3 big things that I want you to really look at these as opportunities that New Zealand can absolutely take advantage of. GLP-1, longevity and health span are the biggest shift in a generation that's coming to us right now, and it is pointing at exactly where New Zealand grows. So if you're on GLP-1, which many, many consumers are, I heard the Australian figure yesterday was about circa 7%, goes up to 10%, depending on wedding season, and the brides are all onto it now. Your appetites are going to be smaller. So every bite will have to earn its place, and nutrient density beats volume every time, and it will as a result of what consumers will choose. Longevity. Consumers are no longer eating just for the next meal. They're eating for decades of health. And this has been the biggest shift that we've seen after COVID. health span. The goal has really moved from treating illnesses to protecting functionality, right? That's what we're all looking for. We're looking for whole, minimally processed produce, and that's the direct shift that New Zealand is staring down the barrel of. So the opportunity is right there. The question is, are you speaking, and is your product speaking to the market and that fork in that way? Of course, you have the fantastic example of the kiwi fruit. This finds itself, actually the gold one does, not the green one. I did try the red one, but I'm a fan of the gold. It finds its way on my breakfast table every day because I am like that longevity customer looking for my nutrient density every time. And it has been your highest crop. A great marketing success story. You walk into Australian supermarkets right now, actually in Woolies, where I recently shopped, and there it is, branded beautifully right at the gondola end of the fresh produce centre. So really talking to the customers around a nutrient-dense fruit and a snack that you could have. Knowing what those three shifts are coming, how does the kiwi actually advance itself moving forward? The fruit, by the way, not yourselves. So, my practical lessons. For the grower, this is about repositioning what you grow. It's not planting something new necessarily. It's looking at your highest nutrient density line and asking whether anyone downstream is telling that story. And if not, how can you? Or how can you in collaboration with others? For processors, it's one reformulation of a trial this year that you could step into. It doesn't need to be your whole range. Just pick one that you could go and try, tell a clear story that resonates with the consumer. That gets you starting to move, and then you model and scale it as you move along. So the opportunity always lies in the value chain. And there's a reason it's called the value chain. From the same product, how do you start to enable that? And one thing that I did at Simplot was introduce not just the fork to farm, but a whole of crop. I used to go and talk to the broccoli growers on our farms and say, why is it that you're wasting all that great outer leaves? They've got such goodies in there. They're going, oh, Ange, we have to feed the pigs and the cows. But it's your lowest value that you're putting it to. We ended up taking everything off the land and actually processing it into sourced, cut vegetable, frozen, you name it, the convenient type meals that you could get through a frozen technology. So none of this would be a surprise to you. The question is, it's moving up that value curve. You could take something that you grow today and you could sell it as is, or you could convert it into juicing, into powdering, into nutraceuticals, into pharmaceutical, because that is your highest margin. And no one does that better than Fonterra in this country already. So what you get is fresh volume that you didn't have. You get your product actually extending over time into areas that it couldn't go to. And you're able to give, again, that nutrient density that was not available as an option to your consumer. And what you do is you increase margin, because ultimately it is a margin game. And so many companies that I speak to, that I work with, actually will sit there and tell me all their costs. And the key question I always ask is, what is your margin? What is your profitability? How do you have actually transparency of your margin across that value chain? So a powdered and a nutraceutical format will travel further. It won't wait for a piece of fruit or a vegetable, and it will solve for that shelf life. The value-added formats actually do capture what the consumer will pay downstream, and it's not just as a B2C, but a B2B. One of the biggest shifts that's happening currently globally is, if you look at the B2B markets, is what's happening in the ingredient base. Yes, we've all heard of protein, yes, we've all heard of fiber maxing, but how do you actually give all of those options in a transparent, safe, provenance-led way into ingredients. So don't discount the whole B2B side as well. So what can you do about it? For growers, the entry point is your surplus. How much surplus do you have? Off-grade fruit that the retailer won't take because of the spec or the factory won't take. What about testing it? Testing it with a toll processor. It's a low-risk way to do it. Yes, it's going to be costly, but you've got to start somewhere. And even better if you come together as a region or a cooperative where you can actually maximise that value and test your way into it. I think one of the key things that always scares companies is, oh, I've got to produce huge volumes, I've got to go out and, get a Woolies or whoever on board and get into all of their shelves. No, you don't. Just go and do a test market first, get your data in market, and then iterate and build from there. That is the quickest way that you can start to look at this space. And we can't stand here and not talk about beyond our borders, because those markets are moving and they're moving fast, and that consumer is demanding more and more. We heard some of that this morning. China is moving up the value curve, and India has just opened its doors, as we heard. And China remains the world's largest food importers for now. I think the operative word is for now. I also chair the Australia-China Business Council Agribusiness and Food Forum in Australia. And one of the questions that we keep talking about is, it's not about just trade, it's about actually being sticky with our partners in market. How do we collaborate? How do we actually create things and share IP a lot more so that we can actually be the partner in region? And that then leads to regional security. But what's happening in China is worth knowing is that the higher tier cities, which are much more premium, much more health position categories, are growing, while the budget categories are softening. So you are seeing this downgrade story happening. But it's not a downgrade story only, it's a sorting story, and you try to see that in most of the economies. I mean, let's face it, China will continue to grow at a GDP of circa 5 to 6 this year. It's a hell of a lot more than both of our countries. So it is starting to move up the value curve, and for horticulture, that is a signal. It means that consumers are looking for your produce. They are interested in all of those three things that I shared before. Again, they're trading for freshness, they're trading for provenance, they're not trading down on all of those. And of course, we can't sit here and not talk about India, which already has come up. With your trade agreement signed, your duty-free or reduced trade quotas of your produce that is going across, and your current horticulture exports, I think it's sitting at circa 118 million, right, from what I saw. It is a small base, but it's a very strong base to start off with. And the door is open. So India as a market is opening up. It means it is going to be the world's largest economy within a decade for sure. And it's not here, and I say the same thing in Australia, it's not about sitting here and saying, how do we get all of India? No. Think about that fork to farm. How do you reach that aspiration consumer that is willing to pay more? I've been in the game of value in the business of chocolate. That's not where you want to be, right? You want to definitely drive up the value curve. So what does this mean? For growers, the FTA detail is pretty dense, but I'm sure across the conference today and the next day, you'll find lots of people who are really building their expertise into it. You don't need to understand all of it. I think it's the one action that you can. So it's one step forward. It's to check against your product. Where does it sit? What does the tariff schedule look like? How do you step into that space? If you're a processor, I guess, looking at the nearer term, sort of to the China market, and looking at your existing relationships, how do you start to drive up that premium value curve that the Chinese consumer is really looking for. And it may come down to some of those value-added formats. It may come down to you stepping into the occasions of a Chinese New Year or their celebratory times in terms of how you package and get your product over to those markets. So my last slide, Jahan, I'm early, is it's your moment to pick. I think you can sit here and go, wow, we've got huge opportunities. We're waiting for our government also to give us the market access. But that is based on that default option of using a farm to fork approach. If you were to evolve your thinking and move it to this fork to farm approach, you start to unopen opportunities that are probably not there today. It starts to tear you up to that value curve. It doesn't mean you have to stop the other way. It just buys you more freedom. It buys you margin points and profitability that you can start to absolutely leverage. And for me, really, the question back to you guys that I started off with is, unlike my grandparents back in the day, are you designing for the fork or growing for the farm? And that is going to be really the difference. If you think about horticulture's next decade of growth, it's going to come all from that fork and from that consumer. And you're not alone, Kiwis. We're in a race, like it or not. The Canadians are, the Aussies are, the US, the Europeans are, and there's plenty of markets that are opening up like India and China who will really become exporters in their own rights at the end of the day. Clean, green and safe is only going to get us so far. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm open to questions since I'm a little bit early.
Wonderful. Round of applause for Angeline. Thank you. Angeline, thank you so much for a stimulating presentation. We have lots of time for Q&A, so you can click on the agenda, click on this session, and then there's a little button that says ask a question. I'm sure we'll have lots from the floor, but I'll kick us off. For many years, we have been told that consumer expectations are changing, the consumer is becoming more sophisticated, they have all these different requirements that maybe we didn't even think about 10 or 20 years ago. Are we moving fast enough to adapt in the way that you've described in your presentation?
I'm a really fast girl. I don't think we're moving fast enough at all. I used to say the same thing to my innovation and marketing teams in those FMCG companies that I had been in. I think, by the time you actually get the idea, define the opportunity and go, you're probably not in the market for, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, sometimes 3 years, right? I've been in the potato space. I know how long that takes to go from variety out. So for me, it's about actually testing the marketplace and being almost anticipating what the consumer will want. There's trends now like these 3 that I shared and others that can actually help you, not crystal ball, but start to define where the consumer is moving to. And again, I iterate, test, learn, iterate, and you'll actually get the data that you need to go bigger from there.
Is there something about sitting at the bottom of the world here in New Zealand, separated from many of our major markets, that means that we don't capture that sense of movement and how quickly things are changing in some of those markets?
Yeah, I guess you guys are slightly lower than where we sit in Australia, right?
Just a little bit.
But we are in the Southern Hemisphere. We share that in common, actually. And I'm one for, glass optimistic, if you will. So for me, yes, I think our advantage is we can watch the world. We can see where the market is moving. Some of those GLP shifts, you only have to start to look at the US and the UK now, and it's going to come here, right? And so if you're anticipating those, how do you start to design for that? At the same time, I think the other mindset that we need to shift, and I always say this, you could actually pick up this room and put it in Australia and the Australian room that I'm speaking to and bring it here, and we're probably going to be having the similar conversations.
Is that true?
That is very true. The difference is scale. right? So we probably, and also our federated states over there, that makes it a little bit challenging for collaboration. So for me, I think we've come from this mindset of, grow, pack, ship kind of thing, and we have been successful. So I'm not knocking that back. I think it's built us to where it is, and we're grateful for that. It's not going to be where it needs us to take us to the next level of growth.
Are there any things that our Australian competitors are doing better than us that we can steal and pinch and copy? Give us some IP here. Give us some ideas.
I would fast follow to your heart's content, guys. So go out and visit the marketplace. I know Australia, and I was actually having this conversation earlier in the session with someone, and I know a very good, big, large processor in horticulture in Australia. I won't name them, but they go out to Europe every year. They check out what's happening there, and then they come back and go, okay, how do we fast follow this? So none of this, it has to be always invented here. How do we fast follow? Who has got the variety, the rights, the licenses? How do I grow it? How do I go and quickly test it? Right, but always with a view to, if you're first to market, you're going to have to educate the consumer. So that's a burden, but also an opportunity. The second thing is you can just pick up things and test in the marketplace. Sometimes I think we are afraid of failure. We share that across the ditch, by the way. And at the end of the day, the market's moving so fast, the model that we apply to our innovation and our growth has to evolve with that.
And you're using the word test and experiment a lot. So it's not about just sitting in the boardroom, getting the committee round and ideating to your heart's content. We need to actually try some stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. Data. And if you can't sit there and go, oh, I wish I can, or in 3 years' time when we have CapEx, the market's moved.
Yep.
That fork has already changed, right? So if you're a board member there, and I sit on a number of boards in Australia as well, one of the big things that we're encouraging our teams to do is to go out there, test, learn, get the data, iterate, move forward. Do it often, do it quickly.
Thank you for your questions coming in from the floor. A reminder that you can vote for the questions that you want asked as well. Bhumika says, what are the top 3 changes you want to see in the food system, and what innovations can drive these changes?
Great question, thank you. Top 3, okay. So if I look across the food system, I know I'm standing here talking about fork to farm, which obviously is around premium high value, but we should not forget that one of our jobs, and I say my role, is to feed Australia and the world, right? That means you need to provide accessible, nutritious, sustainable, safe food for humans of all, whether they can afford it or they can't. So that is implicit in that food system. Secondly, we've just got to get out there and try things. Stop planning the innovation portfolio. Someone asked me the other day, oh, we've got our strategic plan for 3 years. Gosh, what do you know in 3 years? Where is the world going to be in 3 years?
Yeah.
Not to say that you react to that. I would be kind of going on a 12, 18-month strategic direction and be willing to evolve as you come. And thirdly, I think we have a job to do to still educate the consumer about our great produce. I mean, what is the biggest competitor when you think about, I used to say this when I worked in fresh cuts, what is the biggest competitor to fresh produce? Anyone want to have a go? It's not someone else in the next region, it's not Australia or another country, it's pharmaceuticals. Gosh, how many pills are we all popping all the time, and look at the margins they create? What is the consumer looking for? Minimally processed, functionality. I'm eating it from where I understand the farmer has created. So I think that has to be the shift.
Great. Kazi says, I work with the vegetable sector. The next step with value add for juicing, powders, nutraceuticals is a big step. Can you break down some of these trends in market and which are looking the most promising?
It's a good question. I think, it will depend on the segmentation. It will depend on the market that you're looking at. Come have a chat with me in the break so I can understand what your specific piece is. But I would start with, and I said this earlier, I said, you don't have to sit there as one producer and one processor and go, this is what I have to do. How do you bring the whole of everyone together to start to do that. And that is going to defy the thinking. It actually gives you the economies of scale that you need. Otherwise, you end up creating a factory, and I guarantee it because I know the insides of most processing horticulture factories. If you're like a what is factory, you are probably creating the price to the bottom, as in commodity-based, keep doing the same thing, but then you're actually competing with other people who can do the same. What you need to do is create that differentiated piece and target pharmaceutical. That's where you need to with your offer, which is better.
Kate says, if you grow a commodity vegetable more focused on the domestic market, how do you flip this to an export-focused opportunity?
Well, depending on probably, I assume, thanks Kate, I assume that you've already got...
Kate is from Potatoes, New Zealand.
Oh, Potatoes, New Zealand. I think I've met Kate from Potatoes, New Zealand before. So I would be looking at, if you've already got the processing and everything, be realistic, you need to run that factory at a certain rate, right? So there is a portfolio approach to this, which would mean that some of that raw has to go to domestic, some of it has to go to own label. But I would be looking at growing the kinds of varieties that will actually start to unlock more of that export spaces. And it's better to actually have a chip that commands a higher margin point than be able to actually just take potatoes chilled or something like that.
Thank you, Kate. Carla asks, does going into new product lines like juicing spread our focus and risk us doing too many things poorly?
Good question, Carla. Portfolio approach will be my tip there. I think it's don't spread yourselves too thin. Like I always say, then you become Vegemite, and we know how that ends up. For me, it's about making sure the right strategic choices. And in that value curve, there was juicing, there was powdering, there was one of those, right? So pick what makes sense for your offer and go and test it. And you might need to test a few different ones before you try it out, right? And that's why I'm saying go and find a toll man, a co-man that can actually help you test that rather than you sitting there with a business case that you'll never get an ROI on, and therefore you'll shelf the idea before you know it.
Lloyd has a question. There is often a disconnect between the grower and the customer. How do growers in this supply chain design for the fork?
Well, aren't you guys all customers too? You know, if you go out and talk to people, you'll understand. I think the other thing is use your contacts. So whether it's a retailer that you're selling to, gosh, the retailers have all of that data. Are you asking for some of that data when you actually give them your produce? You know, I want to know what that scan looks like. I want to get into juicing as a category. Can you give me some of that information? There's ways to get the information. The question is, how do you convert it into the right insight for what it is that you need to innovate and grow on?
Hugh says, in the absence of processes, how important is the market incubator idea critical to starting? And more importantly, how to attract capital to follow the fork to farm model? Or do we just expand the dairy or kiwi fruit models?
Nothing wrong with expanding dairy and kiwi fruit. It's gotten you to a strong base. I'm not sure if capital is a challenge here or not. I mean, I keep hearing it in Australia, but it's not. I think what we have is, yes, the capital is a little bit scarcer, but if you've got a great idea and if you've got a market that will need something, then you can find the capital. Processes, I think the model on processing, because I see this also a lot in Australia, is how do you get to much more aggregation or integrated type models within regions and areas so you can maximise that. So it's that starting of that cooperative style model, which also means that you can then, you know, take a whole of crop approach. You can be quite circular in the way that you also produce. But you're able to use some of that in your, you know, energy and waste valorization as well. So I think that's a model. And it is also then less capital intensive because you can share that load and that risk.
And finally, what would you advise a business owner or a leader about how to protect their business against future shocks given the volatility that you've told us about today? What is something practical that people can go back and do in their organisations?
Very good question. One of the tools that I use on our board is sort of using foresighting and scenario planning and analysis. And they may sound like big, scary words. They're not. It's actually just finding the time to work on your business rather than in your business. We never have time for that as business owners, right? And I hear that all the time, and it's actually having a conversation where it's at board level or you're a one person, finding the right people that come together and kind of anticipate to go, if this happens, what will we do? You don't have to have it all laid out in a beautiful roadmap or anything. What that stops you is when that disruption event does happen, you don't react. And we saw that, right? We saw that with the whole fertiliser and the fuel crisis. I'm talking an Australian option here. The people who actually reacted ended up actually spending so much more money in terms of what they were doing and scrounging around and getting it versus, and not to say, no one ever heard of Hormuz, by the way, before this anyway, and not to say that, you would have anticipated it, but what they did was they understood their whole value chain. They understood where their margin points was going and who was taking that so that they could respond within each one of those.
But you're not just talking about generic strategic planning, because you told us earlier that the strategic horizon is kind of getting shorter and shorter, right? So am I right in thinking you're talking about systems, processes, preparing for different eventualities, those kinds of structures?
Yeah, it's specific to your own world in your own business, and you would each know that, right? So if you're potatoes, what does that mean in your space versus if you're kiwi fruit or whatever? So for me, it's actually, understanding your own value chain and where it is that you can actually understand the risks, but also the vulnerabilities that you'd have. And don't forget your margins.
Wonderful. So much great advice in your presentation today. Thank you so much for coming and joining us in Wellington. A big round of applause for Angeline. Thank you.